homemade broth has become one of the most important things that I make for our family and can for our family. It is a way for us to use up the last bits of any of the animals that we raise and harvest on our homestead. And it's an opportunity for me to make something really healthy for my family when I'm cooking and when they're sick. I generally do several really large batches of bone broth in the fall and over the winter, and it saves me a lot of time doing a lot at once so that I can just pull off a jar throughout the winter and the fall and the cold months and use it in my cooking. Today I have one of my really large batches of broth ready to go into jars and into the canner. And several of you have asked for me to teach you how to can bone broth. So today's the day where I'm going to teach you what I do and how I can it. When I make bone broth, it's really pretty simple. There's not much magic to it, and there really aren't a lot of ingredients for my bone broth. And I generally do two types of broth. One broth is poultry broth that I will incorporate chicken bones, turkey, and rabbit, or any other kind of birds. I know rabbits aren't a bird, but I consider them poultry. And then I do any kind of red meat bones together. I generally have venison bones because that's really the only red meat that we have. Occasionally we will process some goats, so in my red meat bone broth there could be goat bones. In the past we have purchased beef from a rancher. We haven't done that in several years, but if I had beef bones, I would use them in my red meat bone broth. So the bones go in there. I put onions, celery, bay leaves, peppercorns. I don't use any salt or garlic. I do that afterward when I'm using them in my cooking. And I always put a splash of vinegar in each batch, and that helps pull out the minerals from the bones and incorporate that into the broth. So today we are starting with separating the bones and all of the bits out from the wonderful, beautiful broth. And there are two kitchen gadgets that I use for that. One is a tongs, and the other is a wide spoon that is slotted. Now, especially with beef bones or any animal that has bigger bones, I start using the tongs because I'll go through and I'll just get the big pieces out, let them drip, and then I'll put them somewhere else. Now, on our homestead, and because I do such big batches at a time, I actually put all of this used bone and meat and all that kind of stuff into a bucket. And then I actually take it out to the woods for the wildlife out there, for the woodland creatures. If I had a lot more time, yes, I could definitely dry the bones and powder them for bone meal. But I just can't do everything. I wish I could. But at this time, I'm not doing that. When I make bone broth, I prefer to let this all cook for 3 days. At least 2. But I prefer 3 days. I think that it makes it a really great flavor and it just really turns out good for me. But by that time, any meat that was left on the bones, all of the flavor and all of the nutrition has really been leached out into the broth. So even if you have some meat left over when you're separating these out, it's up to you, but what I've found is that it just really doesn't have any flavor anymore. And so I just discard all of that with the bones and then take it out to the woods for the woodland creatures. Once most of the big bits are out of the broth, then I start straining the liquid through a big sieve. I use a big pot because there's a lot of liquid in here. I also like using a big glass measuring cup to dip these out rather than a ladle. It just goes a lot faster when I have a lot to do. strainer will get most of the bits out, even some of the pretty small ones. But if you want a broth that is clear and doesn't have any sediment in the bottom of your jar, you'll want to also put it through a cheesecloth or a wet tea towel. So 3 of my big roasters of broth actually filtered out to make 1 full stock pot, and actually I had to bring out my water bath canning pot, and it almost filled both of them to the top. That's pretty awesome. The next step for me is to skim the fat off the top. Now when you're making broth, inevitably there's some fat either in the meat, on the bones, in the skin, or whatever. And after you have that cooking, all of that floats up to the top. So after you strain it and after everything settles, all of the fat will come up to the top. Because I'm going to be canning this today rather than tomorrow or in a couple of days, I'm going to skim it off the top right now. But if you don't have time for this, or you want to do it in a couple of days, you can also cool down this broth and put it in the refrigerator. And as the fat cools down on top here, it will harden. And then when you bring it out of the refrigerator, you can almost just peel it off the top. And that method works really well. In fact, it actually works better than this. You can get off almost every single drop of fat. I pull the fat off of my broth because I don't like the flavor of it. I don't like that it will leave kind of a film on my lips if I'm drinking it or when I'm making a soup. And I really think that it can make your broth taste rancid after a while as the oil gets older and older in your canning jar. So that is the reason why I do my very best to get all of the oil off of the top, all of the fat, and why I suggest, if you have the refrigerator room and the time, to do it that way. Well, the broth is strained and I've skimmed all the fat off the top. So right now I am heating it back up on the stove. And in the meantime, I'm going to get the canners out and get them ready. I'm going to be using 2 canners today, an All-American double stack canner and just my single stack Presto canner. Both of them are pressure canners. That's what you have to use when canning broth. It's considered a low acid food and it needs to be pressure canned. Both of these pressure canners need some water in the bottom. Now the Presto pressure canners have a little etched line near the bottom that tells you when you have enough water. The All-American canners, they aren't as specific, but they do say in the instructions to put in about 2 to 3 inches of water before putting in your jars. Now one of my secrets is to put a splash of white vinegar in the water of both of the canners, and that will keep your jars really nice and crystal clear and clean on the outside so that you don't have as much wiping down to do afterwards. This is actually my All-American Canners YouTube debut. I have not used this very many times yet. I've actually used it 2 times before this video just to become comfortable with it. I was very fortunate to actually be sent this by one of our subscribers who watched me can so much over the summer. They sent me this canner and I'm so appreciative. Today, because of this canner, I'll be able to can 21 quarts of broth at once between this canner and my Presto canner. I'm so thankful. Thanks again. Okay, let's get canning. I've got everything right here that I need. My broth, clean jars, my canning funnel, lids, rings, a wet towel for me to wipe the rims off with, and my ladle, which I'm actually using a 2-cup measuring cup, which I prefer in this situation. If you're just starting canning, there's also a measuring device that you can buy that will show you the distance between the liquid and the top of the jar, which will help you until you kind of get familiarized with what you're doing. I'm not going to use one of these today because I can eyeball it pretty much, but those are super handy when you're just starting out. So when I'm canning broth like this, I'm actually a little bit unconventional in the way that I fill the jars. It just takes way too long to use a ladle, so I just use a measuring cup And I know it just looks weird, but I just bounce the jar on top of here and pour in. And I do this because a lot of times the liquid will spill off the bottom of this measuring cup, and when it does, it just goes right back in the pot. Now when you're pressure canning things, you want to leave a generous 1-inch gap between the liquid and the top of the jar. And then we're gonna wipe off the rim. Now I have a little bit of vinegar in this rag, and it helps cut through any oil or grease that's around the rim. And I'm gonna place on a lid and then a ring, and I'm gonna put it right in the canner. Now I'm gonna keep doing that in this canner until the bottom level is full, and then I will put a divider down which will stabilize that first row and have a nice surface for the second row to stack on top of. After I'm done filling that up, I will start filling up my second canner. The last two are going in. Need to put on the lid on this one. And turn on the heat. Now I've already done that over here with the All-American canner, and that's completely full. So what we're waiting for right now is for the inside of the pressure canners to heat up and to start putting steam out of both of their venting holes. Once you start seeing steam coming out of them, then you will set a timer for 10 minutes. So this canner, you can see, is definitely steaming here, and it has been for about 7 minutes already. I've already set the timer. But this one is just starting to steam, and it's actually really hard to see it on this one. It's just the difference between the two canners. I'm gonna go ahead and start the 10-minute clock on this guy. This Presto canner is all ready to go. It's been 10 minutes that it's been venting. I have my weight set up for 15 pounds of pressure. This weight actually works with, more and more rings of metal on it. This would be 5 pounds of pressure, 10 pounds of pressure, 15 pounds of pressure. Because our altitude is over 1,000 feet above sea level, I need to process my pressure canner foods at 15 pounds of pressure. If you're at 1,000 feet or below, you would process yours at 10 pounds of pressure. Now, I will put that on here, and I will turn up the heat. When it starts rocking back and forth is when I can start my timer for processing time. With broth, you can process for 20 minutes. But again, because of my altitude being above 1,000 feet above sea level, I need to add another 5 minutes to that. So I will be processing this broth for 25 minutes. Just as the Presto pressure canner is starting to rock, the All-American canner is ready for its weight. And it has a different kind of weight, so you'll want to look at that. I'll be using the 15 pounds of pressure side of the weight. The first canner is done, so we can just turn it off and wait until all the pressure drops. And when that happens, this little lever will drop. The second canner is done, so I've turned off the burner. And now this one needs to come down to 0 pressure, no pressure. The first canner is still cooling down as well. After they cool down and they don't have any pressure, then we can just remove their weights, which will allow more venting to occur, but really slowly. We don't want this to happen too quickly, or all of the liquid will rush out of the jars and flow out. And that will compromise the seal of your jars. So this actually needs to be a slow cool down process. Oh my, It is late and I'm exhausted, but all the broth is done. So I'm just gonna carefully take off the lids and start taking the jars out. There, now that is a good job done. You guys, I hope you learned something today. I hope that this gave you the confidence to try canning your own bone broth at home. I just love it. It's one of my very favorite things to make and to can on the homestead. If this is your first time on our homestead and you have not subscribed yet, right now is the perfect time to hit the subscribe button below. Thank you to all of our faithful traditionalists that come back 5 days a week to watch all of our new videos. If you know somebody who would enjoy our channel or would like this video, please go ahead and share it with them. And until next time, thanks so much for stopping by the homestead. Take care and God bless.